Good evening, and welcome to Musing, a storytelling series. True stories, as remembered, told by the people who live them. Live streaming to you tonight from the beautiful BLUEBARN Theatre here in Omaha, Nebraska. My name is Seth Fox, and I am the curator for Musing. And over the past 10 weeks, it has been a true pleasure workshopping with and getting to know the three storytellers you'll be hearing from tonight. Their stories will make you laugh, touch your heart, and may even inspire you to one day tell your own story. As you may know, each Musing event has a theme, and tonight's theme is It Seemed Like a Good Idea at the Time. Stories about the best of intentions and unforeseen consequences. And as I mentioned, every story you're about to hear is true. No fictions. Our first storyteller is a husband, a father, academic advisor, comic book illustrator, comic book writer, whose life's ambition is to make his wife laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Drew Dillon.
Hi there, I'm Drew. To give some context to my story, there are two things that you need to know about me. The first is that as a young man, I toured the world as a semi-professional singer and dancer, more singer than dancer. And how that worked was I was with a troupe of about 40 people, and we would go to a new town every 3 days, and we would work with the local kids. We would teach them a 1-hour show, and then at the end of the third day, the whole community would come together, the kids, their families, their teachers, everybody, and we would perform a 1-hour show, and then we would help the kids perform a 1-hour show. And it was such an amazing experience. It really formed who I am now in a number of ways, not the least of which is that is how I met my wife, Jen. And that leads me to the second thing that you need to know about me is I am absolutely a wife guy. Oh my God, my wife is amazing. She is better than me at everything. She is more talented than I am. She is funnier than I am. And what's important to this story is she is smarter than I am by a large margin. Love you too, honey. So those are the two pieces of context that you know for the story. After touring the world, I decided to go back to school, and I wound up at Cal State Long Beach in Long Beach, California, which sounds great, Long Beach. When you're here in Nebraska in January, thinking about the beach just brings light and hope. But that's until you find out that Long Beach is the worst rated beach in California. You would go down to the water and you can see the oil derricks just offshore. So I never learned how to surf, which is one of my great regrets. But I was in Long Beach and I was feeling that wanderlust of, I had been traveling the world for so long and now I was stuck in one place doing one thing and I wanted to do something new. So when I saw a sign, a flyer up at the Student Union advertising alternative spring break, it caught my eye immediately. And it said, travel to New Orleans over spring break and rebuild houses with Habitat for Humanity. And I thought to myself, I've never been to New Orleans. I'm going to New Orleans. And I brought it home to my wife, to Jen, and she said, well, I've never been to New Orleans. We're going to New Orleans. And so we signed up, and that was when we found out that it wasn't just a week-long trip. It was also a semester-long course with like homework and grades and stuff. And it was actually really amazing because we learned a lot about New Orleans itself. From the geography, for example, New Orleans is shaped like a bowl, and it's below sea level, and it's surrounded by water, which is bonkers to me. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. We learned about the people, the languages spoken, the culture, the food. Oh my God, the food. We learned about Mardi Gras and all the cultural festivities. And then we started learning about Hurricane Katrina and how that hurricane kind of grew in the Gulf and came on land, where it hit, how the levees failed, the governmental response or lack of response. It was incredibly in-depth, and the more we learned about New Orleans, the more we fell in love with this city we'd never been to. And through this class is how I met Dr. Tim Carone. Tim was the instructor. He was the architect of the alternative spring break program. He built it from the ground up because he was from the great state of Louisiana. He was a local boy who couldn't help but reach out and help his home when they needed help the most. And I think it's pretty clear that I have a giant man crush on Dr. Tim. I mean, how could you not? He was fun and funny and charming and outgoing, and I found out that he's a huge comic book nerd. And I discovered if you walk through the lunch line with him, he'll just buy your food, which as a poor undergrad was the most amazing thing. And I think it's fair to say that he liked me too, because I am fun and funny and charming and outgoing and ever so humble. I am also a huge comic book nerd, and so we bonded over that. And I let him buy me food, which I have to imagine is something that was very endearing for him. The point is, we had a very great relationship in class and out of class. This is the man who gave me my first king cake, which is a sacred bond. So throughout the first half of the term, we were learning from Tim, and then spring break hit. And our class of 20 or so young people, we were vibrating with energy, so excited to go to New Orleans and use our knowledge and our passion and our youthful vigor to just save the whole city by ourselves, single-handed, no problem. And we got to New Orleans, and we raced out to see the damage that we were going to fix. We looked around the downtown area, and it was fine. It was your normal metropolitan downtown area. There were taxis going by, people going to lunch, people just living their lives. And we said, oh, well, I guess we missed the worst of it. Let's just have fun while we're here. And we loaded into our bus to head over to the next parish, St. Bernard's Parish, where we would be working and where we would be staying. And we realized just how quickly we were dead wrong. We were touring these neighborhoods that were mostly abandoned, where there were maybe one or two houses you can tell people were living there, and everything else was overgrown and boarded up and falling apart. There were houses that still had the spray paint marks from when FEMA came through that basically say, yes, we have searched this house for bodies. And it was this flood-affected area. Things were sunk into the ground. I remember seeing a fire hydrant where all you could see was the top 3 inches sticking out of the ground because everything else had sunk so low. And we saw all of this with our own eyes after reading about it and seeing pictures and not realizing the truth of the current situation. And we realized that we couldn't make a dent in this situation, this systemic failure, if we had 100 years. So we took our new emotions to the place where we were going to be staying, to Camp Hope. And I'm pretty sure they called it that because that's all that was keeping the walls up, was hope. It was an abandoned former middle school that had been turned into a Habitat for Humanity site. They did the bare minimum to get up and running. I'm sure they did their best, but that couldn't have been their main focus when they're rebuilding houses for people who lost their houses. So we came in and we found our rooms we'd be staying in, and there were former classrooms with bare metal bunk bed structures, and all of these pampered California kids who came with us, who were not used to roughing it, I could actually hear their hearts sink through the floor. And so I think it's safe to say that after that first day, morale had tanked for all of us. So Jen and I, rays of goddamn sunshine that we are, decided that we were going to pick up people's spirits. And I decided that since that spring break fell on April Fool's Day that year, the way we were going to do that was by playing a prank. Now, I wasn't going to play a prank on a stranger, so all the other volunteers and AmeriCorps members were off limits, and obviously I couldn't play a prank on my fellow classmates who were already feeling so low, so that really only left one target, and that's Dr. Tim. Now, since Dr. Tim had built this program himself, he was there every year. We were the third year to go and do this. And he had talked about the previous classes and how excited he was when they performed a talent show for some of the local people, and how it was just like a little cool thing that they did. So I decided that my prank was I was going to tell Dr. Tim that we were going to do a talent show, but then not to do a talent show. And he would go down to the cafeteria and wait and wait and wait, and we would be in the next room just giggling. And that was the idea of the prank. So that next morning, when we were getting loaded up to head to the work sites, I started spreading it around to my other classmates, like, hey, we are going to do a talent show. Wink, wink. I forgot how to wink there. And then we hopped in our vans, and we went to the work sites. We met the families that we were going to build houses for, and we got to work. We started sawing and hammering and putting up siding and all sorts of stuff. And in between the hammer strokes that I was using to build this house, my fellow classmates came up to me and said, hey, what do you think my talent should be? Which is a weird question in itself, but I quickly realized I was no longer playing a prank. I was putting together a talent show. So that we went through that day and the next day, and then we had a talent show. It was a really quick turnaround, but it turned out beautifully. We had a wide variety of talent in our class. We had a guy who came up and he sang a famous New Orleans song, and we had a girl who was trained as a hula dancer, and so she showed us that. And there was one gentleman who turned out to be a contortionist, and he just collapsed into a knot on the floor, and it was gruesome and fabulous. And another guy came up, he decided his talent was he was going to try to eat 10 saltine crackers in 60 seconds. He just crammed him in there. He failed spectacularly. We loved it. And Jen and I, we decided to do a tap dance from our performing days, and so we got up and we just kind of pulled it out of our pocket, and it looked great, unless you know anything about tap dance, in which case you go, hey, they just did 40 time steps and a few trenches, and ta-da. But whatever, we were having a good time. But in my bitter heart, I could not let go of this idea of playing a prank on Dr. Tim, and so I decided to do my own talent. And I said, I'm going to perform a skit, and then I will have a riddle. Now, for my skit, I need someone who's really bright, who just lights up the room. So, Ben, you come up, and you'll be my lamp. And I need somebody who's just super kind and humble. So, Victor, you come up, lay down here. You're going to be my floor mat. And I need somebody strong and dependable. So, Dr. Tim, you come on up here, get down on all fours. You're going to be my table. And Tim walked up to thunderous applause, and as he was getting down, I turned and I grabbed my glass of water, and I set it squarely between his shoulder blades. And I stepped forward and said, that was my skit. The riddle is, how does Tim get up without spilling water on himself? And I left. Now, Tim tried to wiggle around, figure out how he can get it off of himself, and he quickly realizes he's completely incapacitated under 3 ounces of water. And so he decides to use his brain instead. He calls a student up to help him out, and I say, Jamie, no, he got himself into this mess, he can get himself out. And we're all just staring at him as he's trying to puzzle his way through it, and the tension is building, and there's no way out, and I'm loving it. And eventually, the saltine guy comes up, and he says, well, really, there's only one way for this to end. And so he picks up the cup off of Tim's back, and he dumps it on Tim's head. Thank you. Now, Tim took it like a champ. He had a good laugh, a good wet laugh, and he said, that's okay, that's all right. I'm a huge believer in karma. And so that was the end of that. And we got to the end of the talent show, and our chaperones decided we needed a clear winner of the talent show. And they decided the finalists were Jen and I for our tap dance, or all of the ladies had gotten together to perform A Part of Your World from Little Mermaid. And Jen, of course, was in both performances, so you know who won. And the chaperone said, okay, Drew, you're a finalist. Why don't you come forward and make a speech? And I wish they hadn't done that, because I am a writer. I like time to edit my responses, to pick the perfect word, to really clarify my meaning. And so if I'm just to stand up and speak, it's very much a first draft. For example, this story that I'm telling from my own life that I've had in my head for 14 years, I've practiced every day for 3 months. So to be able to give a speech off the cuff was not one of my strengths. But I decided what I wanted to talk about was Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, and how they had been this devastating force that had spread people across the U.S. and devastated the houses and property, and of course the number of deaths, and how it was this destructive force in history. But what had come out of it was Camp Hope, and all of these people coming together to help each other and bring that light and laughter and hope back to the world and back to these people who really needed it. And I thought that beauty from destruction was really important. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. But it's not what I said. What I said was, thank you, Hurricane Katrina. And as soon as I said those words, everyone in the room, myself, my classmates, my wonderful teachers, the volunteers from across America, AmeriCorps members, survivors of the hurricane who had come to watch the show, all of us shared one thought, which was, this guy's an idiot. Now, Jen, my wife, my love, the smartest woman I know, jumped in front of me and said, veto, thank you very much, we're done. And she pushed me off stage. They wound up giving first place to the other team, deservedly, I have to say. But I did learn a very important lesson about when to keep my mouth shut. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you so much, Drew. All right, moving right along. Our next storyteller is a Spanish interpreter for the Douglas County Courts. She is also a weightlifter. She enjoys chasing around her grandchildren and sometimes almost gets arrested for doing aerial acrobatics on various Omaha bridges. Please welcome Frankie Mcgregor.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So it was December of 2015, and I had planned an epic 2-week trip through Mexico. It wasn't going to be my first trip to Mexico, more like my 14th or 15th, but usually I went to Mexico City, so this was going to be the first time that I was trying to see as much of the country as possible. And the idea was that I would take advantage of the holiday break and try to escape the Nebraska winter and visit this country that I loved so much. So I drove to Laredo, Texas. I parked my car at the airport. I made my way to the border, walked across the border, and then made my way to the bus station on the other side. And my first stop was Monterrey. And from there, I went on to Real de Catorce, which is an old mining town with an abandoned mine and a ghost town, and most Americans go there to do peyote, but not me. From there, I went on to Torreon, Coahuila, where I stayed in the cutest little cabin you've ever seen, and I invited myself over to the host's mother's house for Christmas dinner. Then on to Durango, Durango, with its beautiful colonial and Baroque architecture. Then to the beach in Mazatlan, and then to Mexico City, where I spent a few days with a good friend from college and his family. After Mexico City, I was going to start to make my way north, stopping in a few towns as I made my way back up to my car. So I took the bus from Mexico City to Guanajuato. And I got into Guanajuato pretty late at night. I would say it was about 1 a.m. At some point before arriving in Guanajuato, I had gotten an email from the host of the Airbnb where I would be staying there. And he had told me that he actually wasn't going to be there. He and his grandmother had gone to Mexico City to spend the holidays there. And he told me that his house didn't have a formal address, that I just would have to tell the taxi driver to take me to Grandma Ramirez's house on top of the hill. And that's exactly what I did. And the taxi driver said, "Oh, sí." So I got to the house at about 2 a.m., and there was a woman who greeted me and showed me to my room. And I was able to get up the next morning and get out of the room just in time for the 11 a.m. checkout time. But when I went downstairs to the common area of the house, the woman who had greeted me the night before wasn't there anymore. There was an older gentleman. He was short, he was wearing a baseball cap and kind of a threadbare plaid shirt. And so I said to him, how do I get a taxi up here? And he said, you can't get a taxi up here. You have to walk down to the highway. So, my plan was to go back down to the bus station, check my bags, and then spend the day seeing the city. So I strapped on my front pack and my backpack, and I started walking down to the highway. And since Grandma Ramirez's house was up on the hill and I needed to make my way down to the bus station, I was walking down through this town in a series of switchbacks. And as I turned to walk down El Callejón del Músico, there were two young men who turned and started walking down the same direction. And as I was walking, they slowly came closer and closer and closer to me. And they grabbed me, and they pushed me up against a wall, and they started whispering, take this off, about my backpacks. And they had a knife that they had showed me. And even though I knew what was happening in the moment, I wasn't able to respond to their commands. And they were whispering because there were people about 100 feet away. But there was a giant ice cream truck blocking the view. So I decided that I would try to get a look at the knife to see if it was sharp enough that they could really harm me or kill me with it. And if it wasn't, I was going to call for help. So I went to look down at the knife, and as I did, they pushed it up against my neck, and I felt that I probably shouldn't try to do anything. So they used the knife to just cut all of my backpack straps. And they took both my packs and started to run away. I think they told me to count to 100 before I got up and left. And I immediately ran around to the other side of the ice cream truck where I could hear the people to ask for help. And I was hysterical and I was sobbing. And the ice cream truck driver just didn't know what to do with me. He looked like deer in the headlights, like couldn't even comprehend the words coming out of my mouth. But the woman who owned the little store where he was making his delivery immediately understood what had happened. And she went inside and got her phone, and she called the police. And then she walked with me up to the top of the hill, the direction I had seen the two young men run with my bags. And she stayed there with me until the police came. And the police took me in the cruiser down to the police station. It was my only ride in a police car so far. And when I got to the police station, they weren't able to help me right away. They had another issue happening, so I was told to sit and wait on a bench until they could talk to me. And up at the counter in the police station, there were two neighbors having some kind of a dispute, and they were arguing, and they were both making their case like they were trying to get, it sounded like they were trying to get restraining orders against each other. And as I'm sitting there, it starts to occur to me all the things that I've just lost. My wallet with my driver's license, my bank cards, about $300 cash, a pretty nice camera, my phone, my iPad, my car keys, all of my medicines, a blanket that my grandma had made me when I was born that I used as a pillow every night. And all of these things just start coming over me. And with each one of those thoughts, I'm just crying more and crying more. And all of the police officers and these two neighbors up at the counter are sort of just like, what's happening to this person? So eventually, two police officers did come to talk to me and find out the details of what had happened. And there was the male police officer who was higher ranking, and then a younger female police officer. And one of the questions that they asked me was, were these people darker? And I didn't know how to answer that question. I was like, darker than who? Darker than me? Darker than you? I don't know what to say. And then the male police officer says to the female police officer, why don't you get the notebooks with the mugshots and show them to her? And the female officer was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, the notebooks with the mugshots so that she can try to identify. And she's like, that's not a thing. We don't have that. And it just felt like he was trying to convince me that they were going to do this bang-up police job and figure out who did this to me. Well, in Mexico, when you want to report a crime, you don't actually do it with the police. You do it with the prosecuting attorney. So I was escorted next door to the prosecuting attorney's office, and his reaction was very similar to the ice cream delivery man. He was in shock and just sort of didn't know what to do with me. But since I didn't have anywhere else to go, I spent the next 12 hours or so in his office. And he took down my report, but he also seemed very interested in me as a person. And he asked me a lot of questions about who I am and where I'm from and why do I speak fluent Spanish and why did I come to Mexico. And he loaned me money so that I could go get some dinner and a contact case and some contact solution and an asthma inhaler. And his level of interest in me was so much that it even led me to believe that maybe it was romantic. So imagine my surprise when I asked him who he lives with, and he told me his wife and 2 children. So I remembered that my boss at the courthouse was from the area, and I emailed him and told him what had happened to me. And he said, my sister lives 20 minutes away. She's coming to get you right now. So this lovely woman and her husband came and picked me up, and the prosecuting attorney was quite shocked that I didn't want to spend the night with him at his office. And it was New Year's Eve, and as I drove away with this woman and her husband through the town, it was midnight, and there were gunshots and fireworks going off all around us. The next morning, they took me back to meet up with the prosecutor so that I could get the money that my parents had wired to him so that I could go home. And after we did that, I went to the bus station to try to get a bus back up to the border. But there were no buses until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And I didn't know what to do with myself in this town. And I was wandering around, and I eventually came upon a movie theater. And so I went in and decided to see the Star Wars movie that was released that day. And I felt absolutely ridiculous sitting there in this theater watching this movie because I couldn't go home. But I eventually got my bus and got back up to the border. And I knew that getting across the border without my passport wasn't going to be a problem. But my mission was to find a payphone so that I could call AAA and find a locksmith who could make me a new key for my car so I could drive home. Well, I believe it was a Monday, and because New Year's Day was on a weekend, it was being observed that day on that Monday. And so there were also a lot of things closed in the United States. I first found a public library closed. I found a gas station, didn't have a payphone. I eventually made it to the airport. I thought surely there'll be payphones at the airport. No, they had both been removed. So even though it was about 50 degrees and it was raining, and the woman that I had stayed with had given me a bunch of old clothes that she didn't need anymore, I didn't have my winter coat. It was locked in my car. So I put on all of the clothes that she had given me, and I continued walking until I found another major intersection that had 2 gas stations. And both of those gas stations had payphones, but neither of them worked. So I went inside the gas station, and there was a group of men having lunch. They looked like maybe construction workers on their lunch break. And I walked up to them and I said, "Do any of you have a phone I can use?" And the way that they looked at me made me very much regret every time someone has approached me in a parking lot or in public and asked me for something, asked me for money, asked me to use my phone. And imagine how I looked. I'm wet. I'm wearing all these weird clothes. So I went up to the counter and I asked the woman working if she knew of any other payphones in the area that worked. And she said that she didn't, but that I could use the phone, the gas station phone. And she overheard me making my calls and asked me what had happened. So I told her, and she said, if you wait 20 minutes, my shift is over, and I'll help you. And she did. She took me to the airport to meet the tow truck driver. She took me to the Cricket store so that I could get a phone. She let me make as many calls as I needed with her payphone. And then eventually she dropped me off at the hotel that my mom had booked for me. And I didn't have any luck finding a locksmith. It was impossible. And then eventually my mom messaged me and said, try this number. So I called the number, and a man answered, and I explained why I was calling. And he said, let me call you back in 20 minutes. I'm at church. So he called me back in 20 minutes, and he said, okay, what's going on? What do you need? And I explained the situation, and he's like, okay, I'm coming to your hotel. Wait for me there. So he came to my hotel, and he picked me up, and he was so excited. He was like, you have the same name as my favorite sister. I love her so much. This is amazing. And you don't need a locksmith. You need a key programmer, and I'm a key programmer. And there's no one else available. It's the holiday weekend. This was fate. And so he took me to this van that he had parked somewhere where he programmed 2 keys for me. And I was able to get in my car and drive home. A few months later, I got a strange email through a website for a small business that I had with a business partner at the time. And it had a link to a Facebook page called Guanajuato Somos Todos. We are all Guanajuato, which is kind of like, it's the purpose that it serves is like the neighborhood app here in the United States. And someone had found my passport, and they had posted a picture of it in this Facebook group saying, does anyone know this person? And someone had Googled me and found me through my website. So I was able to send the woman who found it $60, and she mailed it back to me, and I was able to return to Mexico many times with that passport. Thank you.
Frankie, thank you so much. That's such a powerful story, and you really are an inspiration. You truly are. What a hell of a vacation. So a few years ago, I got a job, a seasonal customer service job for a mail-order brownie company. And this was back in Phoenix, when I lived in Phoenix. And these brownies were so popular that around the holidays, the brownie company had to hire about 80%. They had to increase their staff level by 80% because the bakery was working around the clock, shipping was working around the clock, and upstairs in order processing, we were putting in really, really long hours processing all of these orders that were coming through. They were coming through over the phone, they were coming through via email, and of course people were placing orders over the website as well. So you can imagine, by about the second week of December, how frazzled we all were, how sick of brownies we all were. I do distinctly remember I woke up one night out of a dead sleep, and I was standing at the foot of my bed getting dressed, getting ready to go to work, because I had to place brownie orders. It was surreal, because you would think having brownies on your brain all day long, 24/7, would be delightful. It was not, for the record, it was not. So at any rate, one day I went walking into work, and one of my coworkers came around the corner, and she said, Seth, I just talked to a lady, and she's really mad. And I said, okay, what happened? And she said, a while back, she placed a brownie order. You placed her brownie order, and something went wrong. And I thought, oh, all right, well, my ears had already started getting hot because I'm easily shamed, but I also thought, what the hell could I have done with a brownie order? And so she went on and she said, yeah, the brownies are fine. Everybody got their brownies. Everybody loves their brownies. But there was something wrong with the gift message card. So to explain, each box of brownies came with its own gift message card. And of course, the sender could write a personalized message to put more of a personal touch on the gift. And so, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, love so-and-so. And so again, my neck is now getting hot, and I'm thinking, because I pride myself on being a decent speller, and just the thought of putting out a typo into the world, it just really was stressing me out. And so then she went on, and she said, yeah, so this lady, every year, she places orders for her son's clients. He's an insurance salesman. And so what the gift message was supposed to say was, Merry Christmas from Bob Bernardino Insurance. But what you put was, Merry Christmas from Bob Bernardino and Sharon. And by this time, the back of my head is now getting hot. And I thought, what the hell have I done? And you know those moments where somebody says something, or you catch a whiff of something, or maybe even hear just the slightest piece of music, and this memory that's been lying dormant in the back of your brain, where these memories nap, all of a sudden wakes up and comes rushing to the forefront. And with crystal clarity, you're back in a moment, in a memory, reliving it. And as soon as I heard the name Bob Bernardino, I remembered taking the order from his mother. And the reason I remembered it so clearly was because I was completely delighted by the sound of her voice. I am a sucker for accents. I love accents. To me, accents are like what a shiny object is to a seagull. I just absolutely am enamored by an accent. And the reason why I was especially delighted by her accent is because she sounded so much like the character Rhoda Morgenstern on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, which happens to be my favorite TV show of all time. So while what Mrs. Bernardino actually said was, Merry Christmas from Bob Bernardino Insurance, what I heard was, Merry Christmas from Bob Bernardino and Sharon. And I'm just so delighted, and in the moment, I'm just typing this up, and I'm thinking, oh, Sharon must be his secretary. Submit. So that happened. And yet my coworker goes on. And she said, yeah, so she is really, really mad. And all she kept saying was, who's Sharon? Who's Sharon? Bob's wife's name is Lisa. People are going to think he has a mistress. And at this point, my head is just steaming. And I'm thinking, I have lost my job, and I have ruined somebody's Christmas. And so I thought, okay, we need to fix this. So I went to my boss, and I said, hey, this is what I did. And we did have a good chuckle about it. I said, but we've got to fix this. And she said, I can see that Mrs. Bernardino has been ordering from us for a really long time, so I'll just go ahead and give her a call, and we'll see what we can do. And I said, great. And so she did, and Mrs. Bernardino was wonderful about it. She didn't want anything unreasonable. She didn't want a full refund or anything like that. What she wanted was, she wanted us to reprint the gift message cards correctly and then mail them out to each of Bob's recipients. And there were like 25 of them. And that seemed like a really nice, reasonable, easy fix. And so that's what I did. I reprinted the gift message cards, and I typed up letters of apology, and I sealed them all in nice little envelopes, and I mailed them out. And all was right with the world. And the best part was, well, I didn't lose my job, which was clearly a good thing. But also, the brownie company didn't lose Mrs. Bernardino's business. And even though it's been years since I worked there, every year at Christmas, as soon as she places her order, one of my friends who still works back at the brownie company texts me to let me know that Mrs. Bernardino has once again placed a brownie order. And even better, I didn't ruin anyone's Christmas. Thank you. So all that to say, that had nothing to do with it seems like a good idea at the time. However, I think there are some really, really, really great work stories out there. And so we would like to hear them. So if you have a great work story that you would like to share with us to potentially be used in a future event, Please go ahead and email your pitch to musingomaha@gmail.com. Your email only has to be maybe a couple of paragraphs. Just explain your story and what you took away from it. Again, musingomaha@gmail.com. Just include the words work stories in the subject line of your email. And I assure you, every email will be read and every pitch will be considered. So we do hope to hear from you. All right, our last storyteller for this evening is a government technology specialist. She is also a U.S. master swimmer. She is a foster mom for a bulldog rescue group. She is the mother of one and the nana to one. Please welcome Melissa Chapman.
Good. So, a little bit about me. I am 58 years old, and I have been unsuccessfully married 3 times. I was not a child of a broken home. My parents had a great friendship and great relationship in raising my brother and myself until my dad passed away. And even my daughter, who is the product of several broken homes, pretty much thanks to me, has married a wonderful man, and they're building a really, really great life together. So what is it about me that I can't manage this whole happily ever after thing? I blame Walt Disney. I was the first generation of women to be raised with not only the Walt Disney princess movies, but the merchandise as well. I had the watch, I had the figurine. I went to sleep at night on a pillowcase that said, "Someday my prince will come." Now, the problem with these Disney stories is it starts making you believe that real romance is a prince on a white horse who's going to sweep into your life, pull you up out of the ash bin of your existence, and take you off to become a princess. All you need is a chance meeting with a stranger and the right pair of shoes, and your life will be forever changed. Now, the shoe part is true. But the rest of it? No. So all of these marriages that began with Disney-like meet-cutes ended in pretty predictable disasters. So here's what happened after the happily ever after. So marriage number 1. We lived in castles across the street from one another. My balcony at Sigma Kappa faced a corresponding, matching, yet more masculine balcony at Sigma Phi Epsilon. There were formal dances and candle passings, and I wore his pin, and it all ended with a wedding for 500 of our parents' closest friends. My dress had an enormous train, and I wore a crown. It was the 80s. He fancied himself king of our little Benson bungalow, so much so that he felt it was his obligation to control everything that we did in every aspect of our lives, including keeping track of how many miles I drove when he allowed me to take our car. I found myself sitting alone again in our daughter's hospital room late one night, and I decided that if I was going to be a single parent, I was going to be a single parent. So marriage number 2, we met at a dog show. I was showing a dog for a mutual friend, and he begged for my phone number. 6 weeks later, he showed up at my work with a ring. 6 months after that, we were married. And 6 months after that, he moved out of our house while I was at work to go be with a girlfriend in Texas. The neighbors across the street didn't bother to let me know that he was moving out because they figured I'd finally gotten smart enough to kick him out. But I took him back. In fact, that marriage didn't end until he started pressuring me to get rid of my chickens. You know, honey, I can always get another rooster, but laying hens are worth their weight in gold. So marriage number 3 was to the as yet unmarried oldest son of the family that owned almost half the county. We met one night while we were out with mutual friends. He was so smitten, he went through the entire phone book to find my address to mail me a card with a picture of his horse. Now, I lived in a town of 150 people, so that's maybe a little less stalkerish and creepy than it sounds. On our second date, he announced that he was dating to get married. At age 50, he had not yet been married, and that was his plan. What I heard was, we've been out twice, and he already knows I'm the one. Yeah, well, that's not what he said. He was really looking for a +1 for the Exarban ball. The shoe fit, but he really wasn't all that interested in the rest of the girl. That marriage actually disintegrated into some pretty violent physical abuse. And when that started to happen, I started wearing scarves to cover the bruises on my neck and my chest. He never hit my face, of course, because we had public appearances to make. And I guess it was testament to my position as a small-town princess that I noticed other women in town beginning to wear scarves draped in a similar way. And the irony for me that this was something I had started as a survival tactic, and it had become a fashion statement for people who didn't quite know what was going on. I have always believed that the universe brings you lessons in bigger and more dramatic forms until you get it. And I was starting to get it. I was not real good at this whole marriage and relationship thing. So after I left that third marriage, battered and a little bruised, I decided that it was probably really time for me to rethink some things. And one of the things that dawned on me is I realized that I, as an adult, had never really been single. I had been between relationships. And that lull or that period in between those relationships, the life that I would build for myself didn't count. It was temporary. You know, it was this bridge between my next phase of life. And this time I decided that I was going to consciously be single and I was going to build my own life, not with the plan of destroying it when the next relationship came along, but with the plan of really having this be my life. And I had no idea where to start. I didn't know how I liked my eggs. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts, but her character goes through all of these relationships, and however he likes his eggs is how she likes her eggs. And there's a point in the movie where she's not in a relationship, and someone asks her, "How do you like your eggs?" And she doesn't know. And that was me. The choices were exciting and scary and almost overwhelming. So I just started kind of doing whatever the hell I wanted. I wore lace panties under sweatpants. I drank really good wine out of the good glasses on a random Tuesday night. I painted my kitchen cabinets purple. I got a couple cats, and then another cat. I got a dog, and then another dog. I ate raw cookie dough out of the tube on Saturday nights. I started swimming as a master swimmer, and I founded an age group swim club. I gave tours at a historic mansion. I got back up on stage telling stories, and eventually I took on the very pivotal role of Mrs. Claus in Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. But mostly I just spent my time having a really good time, and I was really enjoying my life, and I was enjoying the people that were coming into my life. But I always felt like we live in a society that kind of doesn't know what to do with single people, and it really doesn't know what to do with single women who are having fun being single. And so there was always this nagging feeling that I was somehow still failing at this whole adult thing. And in that process, and one of those, sort of dark nights of the soul, I was having a conversation with a friend who at that time was 25 years fairly happily married to her husband. And I don't remember anything else about this conversation, but I remember very distinctly when she said to me, "Melissa, I'm married to many things. Tal is only one of those things." And in that weird way of that things happen, that was the epiphany. That was the one thing I clung to that gave me permission to be deeply and passionately committed to everything. And if one of those things at some point happened to be a partner, great. But if not, this was my life. And in that moment, I was still Cinderella, but I also became my own fairy godmother. And there was a lot of magic in that. Bibbidi bobbidi boop. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the storytellers. You're just absolutely wonderful. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you, and your stories were wonderful. Thank you also, Andy. You've been a wonderful co-storytelling coach, so thank you for all of your hard work, for making the trip from Lincoln to Omaha on occasion to help out. You're just wonderful. Really couldn't have done it without you, so thank you. And also thank you, Omaha, for embracing the power of live storytelling. Our first event back in October, sold out in 2 weeks. This event, which was supposed to be live, sold out in a little under 3 days. So that's very, very exciting and very, very encouraging. And so thank you so much. And we hope that you will join us in April, Wednesday, April 13th, when our theme will be life and death, stories about starts and stops, beginnings and endings, renewal and letting go. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great evening. See ya.